Hello YouTube, Sidekick here in my trusty AJS-37 Viggen with another weapon system tutorial video. Today we're going to look at the Robot-5 or RB-05 missile. We've actually worked our way through the Viggen's unguided weapons. If you haven't watched those videos, you might want to go back and take a look. So now we're moving on to weapons that are not technically iron bombs. Now normally I don't do a lot of videos on precision-guided munitions, mostly because they're covered pretty well by lots of other videos, and frankly, I don't usually know enough about them to make much of a constructive contribution to the discussion. But I think I'm going to make an exception for at least some of the Viggen weapons. Firstly, because they're really not all that well covered in the YouTube-averse. And secondly, because some of them, at least, are fairly early versions of the precision-guided weapons. And so they're kind of interesting because they represent a moment before precision guidance really became the dominant way of delivering air-to-ground weapons. And the RB-05 is an excellent place to start because even though it's guided, that guidance is entirely manual. So it may not be a dumb bomb, but it's actually no smarter than the pilot that's guiding it. So let's just do a quick introduction to the RB-05 before we go out and try to use it. The RB-05 was developed in the 1960s, specifically for the Viggen. It is technically what is known as a manual command line of sight guided missile, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. It had a payload of about 160 kilograms, which puts it roughly in the Mark 82 bomb category for those of you who speak U.S. armaments. It had a range of 9 kilometers. It was designed in the mid-60s, and as far as I can tell, introduced in about 1972. It had a pretty short operational life because it was replaced within a few years by the RB-05, which was the Swedish version of the Maverick. It's similar to, and it might actually be based on, the US AGM-12 Bullpup. Now, there's not a whole lot out there about the RB-05, so I'm going to refer mostly to the U.S. experience with the Bullpup and assume that the Swedish experience was at least similar. The Bullpup was actually developed in the 1950s based on the U.S. Navy experience during the Korean War. The first time it was fired was actually in 1955 from an A-4 Skyhawk. The Navy spent a lot of Korea trying to take out small, difficult, well-defended targets, also known as bridges, particularly railway bridges. This is a fact that's actually made famous in the novel and the movie, The Bridges at Toko-ri. It was estimated in Korea that taking out a single railway bridge could require as many as 12 to 18 A-1 Skyraiders, dropping up to 3 2,000-pound bombs each to take out a single railway bridge, which could often then be rebuilt within weeks or even days. And given that the enemy could predict that the bridges would be high-value targets, they were also pretty well defended by AAA, all of which convinced Navy pilots that there had to be a better way of dealing with that kind of target. So the idea of the Bullpup was to produce a weapon that the pilot could guide precisely to a small, hard target like a bridge. Now, the missile guidance system was based on the idea that had actually been around since about 1943, when the Germans had experimented with a similar system for gliding bombs. Basically, the missile was radio controlled by the pilot after launch. The Bullpup and the RB-05 both featured bright flares in the tail so the pilot could watch the missile and guide it with a joystick in the cockpit onto the target, which sounds like a good idea, but turns out to have some major limitations in practice. The first of these is that it's actually fiendishly difficult to steer a fast-moving missile towards a static target when that target is a significant distance away. Firstly, because at any significant range, it's really hard to see the target, especially if the target is small. Secondly, at any significant distance, you really have no depth perception, which means if you're not directly behind the missile, meaning the missile is between you and the target, it's really difficult to affect terminal guidance, shall we say? By the way, this is why later optically guided missiles like the ground-based TOW used, and still use, a system where the operator doesn't actually track the missile and guide it. They just keep a crosshair on the target, and the missile figures out how to fly to it. And this brings up the second limitation. In order to effectively guide the missile, the pilot had to focus on the missile and not the aircraft that he was flying, meaning that they basically had to dive at the target in pretty much a straight line while guiding the missile. And this did not do anything to improve survivability in the face of significant AAA. The final issue is that the missile, while fast, did not pack a particularly large punch. In fact, this was one of the main findings of the pilots in Vietnam, where the bullpup was actually used reasonably extensively, at least early in the air war. Pilots complained not only about the above two limitations, but also that when it eventually did hit the target, the missile basically bounced off. All of which probably explains why the bullpup was pulled from service and replaced with the Walleye and eventually with the Maverick. But enough about the bullpup. Let's go take the RB-05 out to the range and see what the Swedish version can do. Now, it is worth pointing out that the RB-05 is an improvement over the bullpup in at least a couple of ways. First of all, it is quite a bit heavier. It's about double the payload of the early models of the bullpup anyways. There was a C model of the bullpup that was even a little bit heavier than the RB-05 is. The other thing about the RB-05 is it has a smokeless motor, which is beneficial, first of all, because the smoke won't obscure the flares while the pilot is trying to fly it. And the other thing is that the smoke trail of the missile won't point back towards the aircraft that is flying in a straight line towards the target, which the Americans did find was a bit of an issue. So as we get ready to take off here, full disclosure, I'm going to be talking about using the RB-05, but I have no particular expertise in this weapon system, I have to admit. I've probably launched a few dozen of them over the course of getting ready and making this video, but I'm by no means an expert. And unlike some of the other weapons like bombs and rockets, no other aircraft uses this style of weapon. So I really do have no experience with how to use it. What you're going to hear is just my opinion about what I was able to make work with the limited amount of practice that I was able to do. It's funny, I have confirmed a few things in some conversations with some folks who do know a little bit more. Again, thanks to Bishop for a lot of consultation on this. And he was able to confirm that some of the things that I'm finding are at least similar to the way doctrine was written for the when the Swedes were planning to use this weapon. But anyways, we'll talk about that more when we're out at the range. Right now, we're just headed down the runway. We're just going to go and do a range practice, at least initially today, so I'm not going to try and employ the weapon tactically. Just going to go out to the iron bombing test range so we can get the instrumentation out there working for us and learn a little bit about the weapon while we're actually deploying it. And we are no longer earthbound and headed out to the range. So we'll just get ourselves sorted out. As you can see, we're carrying two RB-05s, but of course, in this mission with the range, I do have the weapons or ammunition set to unlimited, so we'll be able to take as many shots as we like. So let's, why don't we just get out to the range? Okay, quickly, just in terms of switchology, it really could not be simpler. You simply set the weapon selector to RB-05 Mark mode, which is also the RB-75 setting. In master mode, it's recommended that you switch into ANF mode prior to firing, but it doesn't seem like that's actually required. You can actually fire from nav mode. And in terms of symbology, well, there basically isn't any. You are going to simply put your flight path vector on the target, pull the trigger, and then you're going to have to guide the missile. You're going to have to set up your joystick or HOTAS system to do that. So one thing that I have realized that my system is quite different than in reality is because I have my joystick that I'm going to fly the missile is under my left hand, I am not going to need to put the aircraft into autopilot in order to fly the missile, whereas a real pilot would need to do that because the RB-05 missile stick is actually on the right-hand side of the cockpit. Okay, so we're just going to use some very obvious targets to begin with. So I'm going to use that white building, get my flight path vector on it, launch the missile. You can see the flare fairly easily. There's a little bit of smoke, but not much. And I'm just trying to keep it straight at the building, and it worked pretty well. You can see I made a little tiny correction at the At the end, I dragged the missile just a little bit to the right. That worked pretty well. But by the same token, we were pretty close to the target. There really was not a whole lot of standoff involved there. So let's go around and see if we can deploy this thing here. Let's take a look at what does the target information tracking script tell us now. Okay, so we were a little bit long. In other words, we clipped the top of the building. So if it had been a flat target, we would have missed long. That's fine. We launched only at about 3,000 meters standoff, which is a lot, well inside the maximum range of the missile, and that probably accounts for part of the accuracy. I'll be honest with you, in the testing that I've done, the single most important factor that I have found in hitting the target is getting the flight path vector accurately over the target when you fire the missile. In effect, firing it as if it was an unguided rocket, and then just using the guidance to add very small amounts of tweaking at the end, mostly left and right. It's pretty hard to sense up and down, as you can see there. With the missile and the target both below us, it's really pretty hard to tell whether or not the missile's on track to hit the target, or whether you need to go up or down. And that's just a matter of perspective, at least when you're dropping from this height. Take a look later at dropping them a little lower, see if that changes at all. Okay, so this time I'm going to take the other white building that's beside that was beside that sort of hangar-like structure, and we'll try and launch from a little bit farther out. Just want to get myself lined up on it pretty well here. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, because we do get to guide the missile a little. And we're inside the 9 kilometers now. There. Alright, now watch the missile. Watch the missile. A little right. And it seems like it's low. But it went over. Okay. Round we go again. So that time we launched from much farther away, but as you can see, part of the problem from launching farther away is it's really hard to tell how close you are to the target. So in some ways it defeats the purpose because you just can't get accuracy and standoff at the same time. Let's see what target information tracking script said. Okay, long, 42 meters long, we knew that. Well, we launched at 5.5 kilometers that time, so a little bit better standoff, but honestly, we weren't very far from the target. We eventually were able to break away from the target because you have to follow it all the way down, so even launching farther out doesn't grant you a whole lot of extra standoff in the target area. So let's go around and instead of coming in from a long distance away, let's try this in a slightly more sort of standard, at least a range sort of roll-in pattern. Get up a little higher. So rather than launching it from far away on a shallow angle, I'm going to launch it in a little bit steeper dive. See if that works a little bit better at hitting that building. So we're just coming out here, going to go around doing, a fairly standard range pattern, but fairly far out. Still not a dive bombing pattern by any stretch of the means. More like a rocket attack profile. But you can see the difficulty of using the weapon. I'm sure that if you practiced with it, and I'm sure that Swedish pilots did, you could get proficient with it, but it sure would take a lot of work. And I think that there would be some folks that would be a lot better at it than others. It really is one of those things where it just requires some skill that if you have it, you do, and if you don't, you can learn a little, but you'll never be really proficient, I don't think. Okay, so same process. We're doing a nice roll in. Level out, we're going to put the flight path vector actually on the target, and then we're going to squeeze one off, and now it's a little bit easier to watch it down to the target now that we get a little bit of altitude, I think. Keep it going. I'm not going to change the height. I'm just going to keep it on line. Not going to change the height, just going to keep it on line. Ooh, that one was better. I really did have to resist the temptation to, it felt like it was low and I really wanted to raise it up, and I really had to stop myself from doing that. But I think that was a good choice in the end. Let's see what the script has to say here in a sec. Okay, 25 meters, not bad. I mean, that's really just affected by our ability to actually split the difference any finer than that. Actually, you know, I'm not sure I could actually identify the center of that target better than that. Interesting to note that the slant range is actually longer on that one. We launched that one from 8 kilometers away, slant range, and that's partly because we were up so high. We actually launched at 10,000 feet. And I would say that certainly was a way, a more accurate way of using the weapon than trying to do it from far back at a low range. But, okay, let's do one more run here on the range. This time, let's look at a real point target. On the right-hand side in those set of 3 smaller circles, the back 2 targets are actually, at the center of the target, are actually bunkers, which I don't know how much experience you have trying to kill bunkers in DCS, but that is a difficult thing to do, even with 500-pound bombs. So let's see if we can put an RB-05 right on that bunker, which is kind of one of the jobs that it was designed to do. And so to do that, I'm going to get actually pretty close and really focus on an accurate drop rather than trying to get any kind of standoff here. So I'm rolled in. I'm just going to wait until I can really identify that bunker. Try to get nice and close so I can see if I can punch right through the front door. There we go. And I gotta come up a little, left, right, back to the right, and ooh! Well, not a bad result, actually. I would say that to some extent validates the model here, because doing critical damage and then eventually killing a bunker, not an easy thing. You can practically drop a 500-pound Mark 82 on top of a bunker and not even scratch it. So I am impressed with my ability to get right in the middle of the target there. Yeah, script says 7 meters, I'll believe that. And standoff range about 4 kilometers out, but obviously we basically had to overfly the target by the time we hit it, so we didn't really achieve any standoff. All right. Well, so that's some range results. Maybe let's try and do a couple of things here. Not fully tactically employ the weapon, but actually use them in a way that maybe a little bit more what they were intended to be used for. First of all, why don't we go hunting some bridges? Because I have to believe that, like the bullpup, that's really what the Swedes partly intended to use this thing for. So we've got a couple of bridges up ahead, and they're just behind where the range area was, but we're going to get down nice and low. So the bridge is our target. So the first waypoint that we're flying to is an initial point. As we come up to the initial point, we're going to pop up, roll over, try and find the bridge, attack the bridge with the RB-05, and then see how we do. So we just need to stay low here a little while longer. Got a couple of kilometers to go before we're going to try and pop up. Once again, very easy to set up the aircraft. We're just have the weapon selector set. Don't even have to worry about the master mode, although we can put it in ANF if we want to. Okay, looking for the bridge. Looking for the bridge. There it is. Roll around here. Probably going to need to go all the way around to get lined up on it. I'd really like to be going straight down the road if I can. So the initial point was set up. And I'm just going to put the cursor in the middle of the bridge, and then once I fire, I'm just going to try and keep it straight, and I'm going to depend on it to be good for range. And there it goes. And it is supersonic, as you can tell. Okay, it's looking good. Just tweak a little bit left and right. Well, we hit the bridge, I think. Or did we clip a tree before we hit the bridge? It's hard to tell with that explosion pattern. Well, we see there is some smoke on the bridge, but we did not drop the bridge. Okay, but you can see sort of how it would work. So just to contrast with that, let's do another run on the rail bridge next door to that, but let's do it sort of in a more conventional attack pattern where we're going to come in high, identify the target, roll in on it, and then attack it from altitude, which would have been the way that, for instance, U.S. Navy pilots would have been attacking bridges in Korea. So again, this was kind of the idea behind the bullpup when it was designed, and I still think that very much underlies the design of the RB-05. So let's see how this works. Now, I will point out that the RB-05, in the end, was not a whole lot more popular with the Swedes than it was with the U.S. It really was not in service very long before it was replaced by the RB-75 Maverick, and I think you can see, for the same kinds of reasons, I think the Swedes just found that while it could be effective, I think it was a very difficult weapon system to use effectively, whereas the Maverick was a lot easier, so I suspect that's why it was replaced. But anyways, let's see. So, a little bit more of a standard approach. Going to take our time, line ourselves up on the bridge. We got lots of good visibility because we're up high. Going to put the screen down a little there. That looks like the middle of the bridge. And it's away. Once again, we're just trying to keep it straight on the bridge and right in the middle. Again, that worked pretty well. So an attack pattern where we're attacking from altitude certainly makes it easier to drive the missile. Okay, so that's one way of using the RB-05 that they might have had in mind when they designed it for the Viggen. Have to believe that another case was probably using it in an anti-shipping role. So why don't we set ourselves up here and go see how the RB-05 would work if we were trying to take out a couple of ships. Okay, so here we are in a Viggen. We're going to go on a ship hunt. You'll notice I'm setting the weapon selector to SJO instead of to mark. When you use the RB-05 in naval mode, you change the weapon selector. So we'll get the radar on here, and we can see that we do in fact have a couple of targets out there. The ships are moving, so we do have an initial target, which was where they started, but the ships are moving, so we are going to use the radar to track them rather than using the target point. But they look like they're about where we expect them to be, so we're going to get down low. Once again, I do not know really what the doctrine would have been for using an RB-05 against a naval target. Now, in this case, you do have the opportunity in that because you're closer to level with the target, you can kind of get behind the missile maybe and steer it a little bit better that way. I'm not sure. At any rate, I'm just going to get low. I'm going to use the radar to aim straight at the targets, and when I get close enough to actually see them, I'm pretty much going to fire the missile, not quite from wave top level, but pretty close to that, and see if we can steer it into the side of the ship. So let us just getting down slowly, not being overly dramatic about it. So, as I said, the RB-05, it was in use from 1972 with the Swedish Air Force. I don't know exactly when it was withdrawn, but I would be surprised if it lasted more than 5 or 6 years. I do know that the Swedes had actually initially intended it to be an accurate enough missile they could actually, for instance, take out individual armored vehicles, but I would be very surprised if it was ever really effectively used in that role. I suspect it would be more effective, as we can see, for taking out bridges or for taking out buildings. I mean, basically the point is you have to be able to identify the target at more than 7 kilometers away in order to be able to launch on it. And that, good luck seeing a main battle tank, especially camouflaged on a battlefield at 7 kilometers away, without any kind of enhanced optics. There's no doubt that it's a difficult weapon to use. In fact, I had heard that Swedish pilots had to fire about 1,000 rounds in the simulator before they would be allowed to go out and actually fire a live missile. So it's something that took a lot of training. I suspect when it was the weapon they had, they learned how to use it very well, but I'm pretty sure that when they had a chance to do something else, they took it. Okay, so we're getting close. I think I can see the ships out there now. They're getting big. I'm just going to pop up a little at the end here, but I'm liking where I am now. Yep, there they are. So give them a little bit of lead. Not too much. Right about there. Okay, rifle. Now watch it. Ooh, stay in front. Stay in front. Come back to the front. Too much, come back. Don't let it go too high. Really got to resist the urge to change. Well, Not bad. Actually, it was a little bit farther aft than I would have liked it to have been. Interesting, because the DCS damage model, we don't seem to have done any damage at all by attacking the ship from the side. That's an interesting feature of the DCS damage model. So just for fun, let's go try a different attack profile here as well. Keeping with what we did before, let's climb up and actually attack the target lengthwise. The idea here being kind of like it was with the bridge, that not really going to steer the missile up and down. I'm just going to try and keep it on line and then assume that my initial launch was accurate enough that it's going to hit the ship somewhere. See what we do if we do that as a way of attacking a ship. Not that I am implying in any way that this is the appropriate tactic to be using when attacking ships, but we're here, so let's give it a try. Okay, so I'm just going to get lined up directly to the rear of the ship. I'm going to put the flight path vector on it somewhere, and then I'm just going to fire the missile and try to steer it so that it stays aiming at the ship and assume it's going to hit it somewhere. Right about there. Okay, so just keep it aiming, keep it going straight, keep it going straight. Well, good hit, 40% damage. So, well, that worked, or at least the DCS damage model thinks that worked better. An interesting day firing the RB-05. As I said, it's interesting to use as much for curiosity's sake as anything else. I think if you wanted to get really good with this weapon, you would have to spend a lot more time with it than I'm probably going to. But I'll tell you, the next time I hear something in a documentary about the bullpup and the Vietnam experience and why U.S. pilots were not really fond of that missile, I think I'm going to appreciate that a lot more. So DCS has done its job in that regard, and giving us a chance to actually simulate something, appreciate it a little bit more. I hope you are enjoying these videos about the Viggen. We're going to continue to work through the weapon suite on the Viggen here, and also probably do some more of the Boreal backhand mission videos. If you're looking forward to that, please do like and subscribe, leave a comment, that helps as well. And come on by the Discord channel and join the discussion. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.